We are pleased with the results, and we're encouraged by the continued resiliency of our domestic parks business given the increased competition. Resiliency means, to me, in this case, I think, basically treading water in terms of attendance, which is not good because right now Universal is growing attendance hand over fist. That's not exactly excited, exuberant language. The resiliency is, well, we didn't take that big of a hit. I mean, that's what I read from language like that during an earnings call. Renegade Online. Needless to say, like I said, the parks thing, or the lack of the parks thing today on that earnings call really kind of had me curious. And let me bring this up. We have another article today from that park place on this. Disney theme parks and experiences revenue hits a record $9 billion in Q3, but the questions linger on attendance and pricing. And let me kind of hearken this into, how many movies today in the box office, hitting $300 and $400 million, $500 million, hell, even hitting $1 billion at the box office in 2025, it just ain't what it used to be. It's not like hitting $1 billion in 2012 or 2013 or 2011 that was a totally different era. When you hit $1 billion back then, you were blowing it out of the water. Now, something like Lilo and Stitch did very well. But by this day and age, even $1 billion, it's not blowing it out the water like it was 15 years ago. I think there's an issue here with the parks as well, because just like movie ticket prices, when you keep jacking up the entry fees, and you have a baked-in audience mostly, and that audience is shifting. It's a little scary. It's more and more to the Disney adult side, less and less to families, because families can't afford it. Not like they used to. And that consumption from Epic Universe has to be coming from somewhere. Either there's brand new people everywhere coming in, or they're consuming it from people that would otherwise be going to, say, right here. And I think it's a combination of both. All right? Y'all can go read this article over there. But the issue with the theme parks, a lot of this, they harped on the cruise lines quite a bit during this call. They were very excited about it, launching new boats, new this, new that. They talked about how this was the highest rated Disney experience that their customers have had. In other words, people rate their experiences on Disney cruise ships as the best thing that exists at Disney in terms of an experience in that business segment. This is why Disney is really pushing hard more into this. By the way, that new massive cruise ship, again, like we reminded folks this morning, you can thank Bob Chapek. That was the boat that he bought in bankruptcy roughly about 3 years ago now, and turned it into a Disney cruise ship. That was Bob Chapek's business maneuver. Like I said this morning, when you look at how Disney treated the parks, I mean, you think about this, they hit record this and that in parks, but yet they spent so little time on the earnings call today talking about parks. I feel like if they really had a banger of a quarter with attendance at parks, I feel like these numbers would have been even way better. And then more importantly, Disney would have talked about it a lot more on the call. They wouldn't have been as relatively reserved as I felt like they were. Going back again to the Comcast earnings call, they were exuberant over what was going on in the parks. They were over the moon. And there was only roughly 45 days of Epic Universe in that quarter. Not even 45 days, actually about 38 days in that fiscal quarter of Epic Universe. I can't imagine what's going on right now. And like I said this morning, I felt like part of the reason that Disney was laying off talking about the parks was because they're probably not incredibly confident about what's going on right now under their feet in this quarter. That doesn't mean that they're suddenly going to be losing money at the parks, but I don't think the numbers are going to be what people expect. And I know they talk about the resilience in the parks, and we'll get to that. They made that comment today. And I think people are overreading into some of that as well. So let me bring that up. We may discuss that here for a few minutes. And again, look at what happened with the stock price today for Disney. If everything was coming up roses, Disney should have jumped, 5 to 10 points today by the end of the day. They were down almost 3. It's not just Valliant Renegade saying this. It's the market at large. There are clearly a lot of questions about what they saw and heard today. That the top line revenue overall for the company really didn't move. And I think people are very, very curious as to whether this ESPN app is going to make up for the losses of what's going on linear. I don't think it will. I want to use this as a reference piece. This is from Blog Mickey. I know. Walt Disney Company reported its Q3 25 earnings in the theme park division had a strong showing. Particular highlight was the domestic theme parks, which saw a whopping 22% increase in operating income against a 10% increase in revenue. About that. The reporting quarter ended June 28th, 25, roughly 1 month after Epic Universe officially opened. Disney took the opportunity to take a bit of a shot at Universal's newest park in the prepared executive commentary. In the prepared remarks, Disney noted the results for the theme park division were, quote, driven by strong domestic parks and experience results. Disney noted that operating income at the parks domestically grew 22% compared to the prior year. There was a lot of price hikes in there from the prior year quarter, so summer last year. Disney said that the domestic parks and the cruise line played critical roles in the results. Disney then went on to underline that it was pleased with the results. They went a step further, noting that they are encouraged by the continued resilience of the domestic theme parks. We are pleased with the results and encouraged by the continued resiliency of our domestic parks business, particularly at Walt Disney World, given the increased competition in the Orlando market. I want everybody to just take that in for a second. Remember how enthusiastic Universal was on their call, and then read this. We are pleased with the results, and we're encouraged by the continued resiliency of our domestic parks business, given the increased competition. Resiliency means, to me, in this case, I think they were treading water in terms of attendance. Basically treading water in terms of attendance, which is not good. Because right now, Universal is growing attendance hand over fist. I mean, it's ridiculous. If they're treading water at Disney, that's a problem. That's not exactly excited, exuberant language. The resiliency is, well, we didn't take that big of a hit. I mean, that's what I read from language like that during an earnings call. We didn't take as big of a hit as we thought we might. The parks are a lot more resilient than we thought. For now. In last quarter. I don't know what's going on right now because they did not want to talk. I mean, look, let me put it this way. If the Walt Disney Company was enamored, I mean, over the moon with how things were going in the parks right now, if they were like, oh no, Epic Universe has been outstanding for us because, hey, Epic is doing great, but we are seeing an increase in traffic in our own Orlando theme parks right now, thanks to our new competition down the street. We have more visitors this year at the same time that we did last year because of Epic Universe bringing in new people that are also checking out Walt Disney World. It's as simple as that. And if that was the case, why would you not fervently announce that during the earnings call? They didn't. They said, we're pleased with the results and encouraged by the continued resiliency of our domestic park business at Walt Disney World, given increased competition in the market, Epic Universe. That's not the same thing. That's not the same thing. There were so many comments out there this summer from our friends at Park Hoppin' and other vloggers out there that were going to the parks again and again and again and again and again and noting that the traffic in the Walt Disney World Resort, particularly since June and July and even into now, into August, we got another report Sunday from Drunk 3PO, that the traffic it's definitely light. It's not empty every day, but it's definitely lighter than they have observed historically. Again, it's anecdotal, but it's something to pay attention to. And then you get this kind of commentary from Disney. They're saying, yeah, Epic Universe is doing great, but our parks continue to be resilient even in the face of competition. That doesn't sound like they're growing. Yeah, they're growing in revenue, but they're all in their per cap spending. But look at all the articles, and especially places like TPP has covered in the last year on the website. All these new fees, all these higher prices, all these new things you have to pay for when you go to Disney. And all the stories that we hear constantly about of, people, the average Disney adult or family going into debt for 12 months or more in some cases to finance a trip to Disney. Why? The problem is that eventually is going to run out, especially when you consider the childless Disney adults. There's more and more and more of these. So the Disney thing is not getting passed down through the generations anymore like it used to for 4, 5, 6 generations. That's kind of coming to an end. I don't think Disney knows how to address that yet. I really don't. Maybe somebody can explain it to me. But Disney did not sound over the moon about parks and experiences. And I've been saying this for months, if not for years. This is why Disney keeps jacking up the prices. I don't hear many, if quite honestly, any complaints about what it costs to go to Universal for a week or for 2 or 3 days. But we have seen countless articles about the exorbitant costs of going to Disney with a family of 4 for just a few days. I can't say I've heard the same stories about Universal. Have y'all? I'm genuinely asking because I don't know. I haven't seen them. So Disney can continue. Hey, look, let me put it this way. Check this out. Back to streaming. 5, 6 years. Disney tells us every quarter, here's how many subscribers we got. Here's how many we added. Here's how many's on Disney Plus. Here's how many's on Hulu. Here's how many's on ESPN Plus, right? And I know Wall Street demanded this. But again, if Disney's so elated and their attendance at Disney World has been growing, why not give us the number of visitors at Disney World? There's nothing stopping them from coming out during an earnings call and saying, hey, look, we had, we're showing this 10% increase in operating income year over year. But here's the deal. What we're also very pleased with is that we've had a 5% increase in traffic in people walking through the turnstiles at the parks year over year. We didn't get that. But again, if you kind of reverse engineer the price increases and the extra fees and all the new fees for lightning passes and this and that, $450 for Genie Lightning or whatever the hell they call this crap now, when you start doing the math, and you put that in with the fact that they're talking about how per cap spending, meaning the per person spending has increased. I bet you the per person spending has increased by more than the growth that you showed in the operating income and the revenues. You know why? Because you increase cost a shitload, and I bet there's fewer people showing up who are per capita spending more money than they did the last time they were there. That's not the way to grow a park like this long term, right? Go down here to experience to see what everybody's talking about. Look, a 10% jump from $5.8 billion to $6.4 billion this year, domestic parks. I'm pretty sure if I go back, we'll find that Disney has overall, on average, increased the per cap spending by increasing prices and adding new fees for lightning passes and everything else and whatever else, hotel costs, park entry costs, extra costs, the cost of food and beverage, all that's baked in there. I bet the increases they've had in the past year are more than 10% or very close. In other words, this increase is entirely due to just Disney jacking up the prices, in combination perhaps with fewer people walking into the parks. everything we've seen and heard from our park vlogger friends seems to indicate that this is exactly what the case is. On the other hand, we saw the report from Universal earlier this week with a nearly 20% increase year over year, which is not due to 20% price increases. It's due to extremely increased demand, and that was with the new park being open for only 1 out of 3 months in the fiscal quarter. Bruh, there's going to be a big difference come next quarter, I promise you. As far apart as the parks numbers were, in my opinion, for Disney and Universal in this quarter, I think they're going to get even bigger on the next one. Just my take. Look at the domestic parks here. I want you to look at the increase. You had an increase of about $300 million in operating income. Okay, yeah, it's 22% bigger. Look at the increase on the top line revenue. Top line revenue jumped, and let's not use percentage. Let's use dollars here. Again, looking at dollars, you went from $5.8 billion to $6.4 billion. So that's a jump of just shy of $600 million. An increase of about $300 million on the operating income. So 50% profit margin right there just from on the increase. I feel like a lot of that has to do with, or at least it seems like, they cut a lot of costs. Because remember, they show revenue and operating income. They don't expressly come out and tell you what line item expenses were. We can only presume, piece by piece. This much for food and beverage, this much for tickets, this much for staff and labor, right? They don't have to do that. I'm just saying. How much of this came from cost cutting in park operations? And I want you to think about this. What are people saying about Disney World experiences for the last couple of years? It's not what it used to be. It's not as clean in the parks as it used to be. There's more things that are broken in the parks and are left broken than they used to be at Disney World. There's not as many cast members or staff walking around helping people. The service quality in Disney parks have gone down from what a lot of people seem to be saying. And I see this in articles. I see it from bloggers, vloggers, everything out there. There seems to be a unified thing. Maybe that's because that they are cutting a lot of expenses out by reducing the quality of service. They don't hire as many people. They don't work as many hours. They're not fixing as many things that are broken. They're leaving broken things stay broken for a little bit longer than they used to, so they don't have to bear the extra costs. Capital investment is something else. Capital investment, when they go in and they pour the concrete and the red dirt into the rivers, that's not necessarily something that's going to show up on an expense report on a quarter-by-quarter basis. That's typically going to show up on down the road as they continue to work on that, and then they open that new section of the park, and they take depreciation on it, because when you spend money paying staff or paying a repairman or having to spend money to fix broken things, that's maintenance, that's labor, that's hard costs that are consumed the moment that they're done. Whereas if I spend $500 million to pour in a bunch of concrete, fill in a river, and turn it into a new ride, that's not an expense that's consumed all in a quarter. That's a capital investment. All you did was convert cash into another asset, in this case, real property, that has a depreciable life. So it doesn't show up quite the same way. So I have a feeling that, all these stories about Disney parks not being the way they used to be, it's not the kind of experience they used to have. That's probably why, at least in some part, why you see this big increase to 22% of operating income improvement year over year, is because they're reducing the quality. They're cutting corners. They're charging people more money to get in and have the lightning lane experience, and and all this. They're raising ticket prices, raising hotel prices, raising the cost of the Lightning Pass and the Genie Plus or whatever the hell else is out there now. But at the same time, they're cutting the expenses of making the experiences better. So they're chipping away at both ends. Eventually, if people get fed up enough with once people decide We talk about this in economics all the time. I did a video on this years ago on this channel, price elasticity of Disney. Once people make a decision that the price to value relationship for a Disney experience in Orlando is out of whack, once they break that economic horizon on the supply and demand curve, it's all over. And they're probably close. They may have already broken it. In other words, people will say, nope, you know what? You're asking too much money. It's not worth it anymore. I don't see the value. I see a value in $4,000 for a family of four to spend a week at Disney, but at $5,500 or $5,000, I'm out. There's no value. The rubber band breaks, and they choose to take their money and they go somewhere else. I think Disney is there. And with the opening of Epic Universe, this may, over the next few years, really accelerate that unless Disney pulls back. The problem is, at this point, if Disney starts pulling back on park prices to bring tickets throughout the year down to a level that more people will accept and then go in and then spend more money on merch and food and everything else, and they consistently reduce the price of hotels and everything, then what do? You've already told Wall Street this is where we are now with operating income and revenue, right? Especially profit. So then what does Disney have to do if they start pulling prices back? If they want to keep up the same game of posting double-digit OI growth year over year, then that means if they do that to get more people in, they're going to have to cut expenses even more, which means perhaps even more quality reduction. Disney is riding right now on just opening a few new things like the Cars ride and the Villains Land to hopefully, please God, be enough. That's where they are. I still think in the next year or two, they're going to be forced to have to announce a fifth gate in Orlando. And it's going to have to be something big, because I think over the next couple of years, Universal is going to really eat in to their park attendance. Universal can't compete with Disney when it comes to the full package of experiences, because Universal, and they may never be able to do it because of the land issue where they are, they're never going to be able to have all the hotels like Disney has. And I don't think Universal necessarily wants that. And I don't know if Universal is ever going to go into the cruise ship business, although they might. I could see Universal getting bigger into the cruise ship business before they try to find a way to build another 50 hotels to rival Disney in Orlando. But in terms of park attendance and customer satisfaction and market share in Orlando, I think Universal is absolutely, they have themselves in a position right now to really challenge Disney in the next 5 years. And Disney has got to know this. They can't keep sitting on their ass doing nothing. Make sure you're subscribed to Valliant Renegade and join us every Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern for the live show.